Thanks for tuning in to yet another podcast of Niti the Policy Lab. Today's conversation is one that goes beyond the headlines. It dives into the power of stories that refuse to be silenced. Today's episode, titled The Power of Storytelling in Establishing Cross Border Peace and Harmony, is one to look out for. And there is no better way for us to begin this conversation by hearing from our esteemed guest, Ms. Zoya Miari. Born to a Palestinian father, a Ukrainian mother, and currently based in Switzerland, Ms. Zoya is an activist and peace ambassador for the voices unheard globally. Through her Waves to Home project, she seeks to challenge stereotypes and showcase the stories of resilience that marginalized communities have to offer across the world. Displacement to dialogue, plight to power, circumstances to choices. There is so much for us to begin with. Ma'am, before we dive any further, we would love to hear from you about who Ms. Zoya Miari is, what your story is about, and what does Wave to Home project for the wider audience. So, ma'am, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much for this beautiful space and good morning from my side. I'm currently based in Switzerland, so it's around 11 a.m. here. Thank you so much for having me. And as you mentioned, I'm half Palestinian, half Ukrainian. My story starts actually in a refugee camp. So I was raised in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon within a community filled with ongoing clashes, so many struggles, so much violence. And this comes with the generational trauma that my grandparents experienced back in 1948 when they were forced to flee Palestine, thinking that it will be just for a few days. And today, after 77 years of oppression and Israeli occupation, we're still denied the right to go back. So with all of this context, that's how like this generational trauma brings so much violence where I was raised. And in that refugee camp, I remember back in 2006, there was a war happening between Lebanon and Israel, and it was the first time that my family and I had to flee a war. And we went to Ukraine because Ukraine was always our second home, my mom's home, and it was our safe space. So whenever something happened in Lebanon, we would just go to Ukraine. And that's what happened back in 2006. We were evacuated as Ukrainians, but my dad, as a Palestinian, stayed behind because Palestinians in Lebanon are stateless. So he couldn't join us. And that's when, like, at the age of 6, I started to question how come a single document could really dictate our whole lives. How could it separate a whole family just because we carry a different document than my dad's? And we eventually returned to Lebanon back in 2007 or 2008 after the war ended and after we decided to go back to my dad. And the situation was still very harsh. We were still living in the refugee camp. And as a child, I was really ashamed and I couldn't let go of the shame that I was carrying. And that shame came from the reality that we were living in that refugee camp. Because as a family of 7, my parents and us, like 5 siblings, we were living in one single room with my whole family for the first 15 years of my life. And during that time, I was going to a school outside of the refugee camp. So I was really ashamed to tell them that I come from a refugee camp and yet alone tell them that I live in a single room with my whole family. So I carried this shame with me for so long. And whenever the students were worried about their grades, I was worried that someone would ask me, like, where do you come from? Or where do you live? Or my friends asking me, like, hey, can we come to your house? Can we come for a sleepover? I was really worried that someone would really ask me these questions. And that lasted until like I became 15. And in that reality, with the ongoing clashes and so on, I think a house next to ours got bombed. And like the action continues in our lives. And back then, like our house got burned completely. And I used to have this little memory box in which I used to collect so many memories and so on. I lost that too. And I remember like being sad the most about that memory box of my pictures and my family's pictures as kids. So, but that's how we ended up like getting out of the refugee camp after the house got completely consumed by fire. And Fast forward to 2021, with the escalation, the situation in Lebanon getting worse and worse, and with the huge explosion happening in the city of Beirut, killing minimum 200 people, we decided as a family that we will move to Ukraine, to our second home. And we eventually did. We moved to Ukraine, my mom and I, and my little siblings. And we had a very beautiful couple of months there. I did like solo traveling. I was exploring myself, discovering my why, and trying to understand what's my purpose in this life. And that lasted for a few months until the full-scale invasion in Ukraine began. And that meant becoming two times refugees, escaping two wars this time. And it took us a few days to really decide and escape Ukraine, but I quickly understood like I'm not a mother, but I have this mother instinct when it comes to my little siblings, and I understood that they need to be in a safe space because we know how it feels to be in a war, all of the bombings and the sounds and the worries and so on. But it took us a couple of days because my grandfather decided to stay behind with my mom's family. He said that I was born in a war and I will die in a war. And we eventually left as my mom and me and my little siblings. And this time something shifted. I was no longer Zoya, the one carrying so much shame, because I started to understand more about the generational trauma. I started to connect the dots. And as we were escaping the war in Ukraine and we were on a train, my mom looked at me and told me, and we were very like in a very overcrowded area, like in a cabin that's meant for two people. We were 12 people squeezed together, and my mom told me like, Zoya, we should sing. And we started singing Ukrainian folk songs, and with each song our resilience grew stronger. And this time I promised myself that if we make it out alive, I refuse to become a victim in life again, and I would become a warrior and a fighter. And eventually we made it out of Ukraine. We came to Poland for a couple of days, and my mom was asking me like, Zoya, choose a country. And I really went to Google, and I'm like, what is the most peaceful country in the world? Enough with wars, enough with violence. And I saw that Switzerland is one of the top countries, and I'm like, Mom, Switzerland it is. So like when people ask me how did you end up in Switzerland, I think that's the story. So yeah, we eventually made it to Switzerland. We stayed with a Swiss family for 4 months and a half, and it was such a beautiful experience with them. And in that safe space that I got from the Swiss family, and they were expecting a Ukrainian family, and then they got like a Ukrainian Palestinian family. They're like, wow. So they told me like, Zoe, you've got a powerful story. You need to share it. And I was like, my reaction was definitely not like, I'm not gonna share my story. But then something started to shift in me, and I started to question what is the story I tell myself? Because as a child, I was telling myself a story that carries so much victimhood. And this time I was choosing to reclaim my own story. So I started sharing my own story with different schools, high schools, and then it ended up to be in churches and different newspapers. And then, like, I started traveling and so on. And I started to see a shift happening from the inside because the mental prison that I was carrying, I could feel that I was freeing myself with storytelling and with the way I was telling my own story to myself before telling it to the world. And that's the shift that started to happening. And I understood the power of storytelling in recollecting the shattered parts in my own story. And this is what I started to do. And eventually, how Waves to Home started, I went to this conference in Manchester because I always imagined myself becoming like a peace ambassador. So this time I went to Google and I wrote down how to become a peace ambassador. And I found this great opportunity to go to a global conference for young leaders. And that's where I met beautiful and amazing refugees from different parts of the world. And mostly I also connected with Palestinians from Palestine because as a Palestinian, I'm not allowed to go to Palestine and they cannot visit me in Lebanon. So it was the first time that we needed to go to a third country to really see each other. And we sat in a beautiful sharing circle to talk about our own stories. And at that moment, we felt the sense of belonging, the sense of home that we often questioned. And during that moment, I remember that we felt so much pain. We were vulnerable. And I realized the power that we have within that pain. I thought to myself, we carry so much pain, but we also carry so much power, and we need to do something out of it. And this is how, when I came back to Switzerland, like Wavestorm started in order to create such safe spaces for refugees, migrants, displaced people, and also later with indigenous communities, in order to reframe the stories that we tell ourselves and no longer to see ourselves as victims, but rather as warriors and fighters. So that's how Wavestorm has started.
Ma'am, honestly, that is such a powerful story, and it would be a shame if people around the world would not be able to hear about your plight. So we truly feel that, your experience all the way from Palestine to Lebanon to Ukraine and ultimately to Switzerland, that dot is something so powerful and so intimate that everyone across the world should relate with it. Ma'am, after all this migration, how did that influence your idea of what a home is? If you could please elaborate on that.
That's a very beautiful question, and this is something I've been asking myself my whole life. I think the solo traveling that I mentioned, I was trying to understand like what home means to me, because honestly speaking, like with all of these experiences, we never found home. Like I cannot say Palestine as my home because I was never in Palestine. We're not allowed to go to Palestine. My dad, even like my Palestinian dad, has never been to Palestine. And then Lebanon also, like it feels like home, but not completely like home, because also Palestinians in Lebanon, we don't get the same rights. I'm not allowed to work there or own anything. So I cannot say I'm completely feeling more like at home in Lebanon. And then Ukraine, like the moment we went to Ukraine, then the war has started. So I couldn't really feel it completely as home. And then coming to Switzerland, it's so interesting. And I always give this example of like in Lebanon, I was born and raised there, and for 22 years, like in my whole life there, I wasn't allowed to work or own anything. And then I come to Switzerland, a country I have never been before, and because of my Ukrainian documents, within 10 days, I received the status that allows me to work. And it felt like so contradicting to me. It felt like such a beautiful moment to be grateful about, and I feel so grateful for this. But it just to me, it didn't make sense that in a country I was born in and my whole life lived there, I wasn't allowed to practice like my human rights. And now coming to a country I've never been to, I suddenly could freely live my whole life. So I think this question of home, and somehow like I started to feel at home back then in Switzerland when they saw me as a human who can work and practice whatever I want. So honestly, like I started like questioning this sense of home and what I understood, because we never could relate home to something physical. I started to say that home is something I carry within myself, and wherever I go, I just take it with me. So today I would say that home is within me, and wherever I go, I just build homes wherever I am with the people that I love, with the communities that I meet. And it's something that I'm carrying within myself. And I think that's the safest space that I can carry home within, because I can be with myself wherever I am, but I can no longer trust that I can build home on the outside as well. So, yeah, today I would say home is within me, and I think also family to me is home, because with all of the changes that happen in our lives, one thing that stayed constant, and it's my family. So, wherever we are, we always say that my mom plays guitar and we sing around her, and I think like that is something that has stayed like this. Like she sang when we were in the refugee camp and we sang around her. She played the guitar when she was in Ukraine and we sang around her, and today in Switzerland we do the same. So that stayed constant, and to me that is also a sense of home.
Ma'am, that's such a wise statement. Even we agree that the idea of home is not only something about physical, but something that comes from within our family and how we dwell around their lives. So, ma'am, building on that, like there's this one statement that even I read a while ago. So every building can be a house, but not every building can be a home. If we draw parallel along those lines, I feel that your statement holds so much merit. Ma'am, this brings me to my next question. As you mentioned, you were brought up in Lebanon, you have Palestinian and Ukrainian heritage. So, ma'am, how did this multilateral form of heritage mold the way you see yourself and the world altogether?
Honestly, I really want to say that even like me saying this, I feel I'm privileged. And I want to point that out because, like when my mom told me, like, Zoe, choose a country, we had a choice. So, and I really want to say this, and I'm very grateful. Like, as a Ukrainian, I'm deeply grateful that Switzerland was a choice that I could come to, and all of the welcoming. And I feel like without it, honestly, without the safe space, I might not be able to be speaking today here. And I might still see myself as a victim, but with all of the empowerment and the safety that I found, I think that gave me the power and the healing that I needed to be who I am today. So, but I still feel it is a privilege because, and I'm talking about the privilege because I'm both. I'm Palestinian and I'm Ukrainian. And I know that if I'm coming as a Palestinian, wherever I'm going in the world, my choices are limited. And it's important for me to point this out because in Lebanon, I lived my whole life with the reality of being a Palestinian, and I know how it feels, and I know the pain that comes with it. And suddenly, me as a Ukrainian, like the world opening their doors and their houses and so on. So it felt like, wow, like I'm the same exact human, but it depends on which side of myself I show that the world would treat me. And I feel like it's very important to be talking about this because this is the message where, like, I'm the same exact human. Whether I'm Palestinian, I'm Ukrainian, whoever I am, I'm the same exact human, and I deserve to be treated the same. And I'm saying this because of the pain I carry with the dehumanization, because I know one part of me has been completely humanized, and the other side of me has been completely dehumanized. And like this brings us to the mainstream media, like how it sees one side of me as like a hero and the other side of me as a terrorist. And that is with the language of dehumanization that we see like a genocide being like justified because of the language that is being used in the mainstream media. And it's important to point it out because this is exactly how genocides are justified, how ongoing wars are, and so on, with the language that we give to others, to a group of people. And I am aware today that with my Palestinian side, it has been a dehumanizing language, whether instead of saying who the killer is, we just say, ah, these people are dead, or this group of people of numbers, and without really giving names to the people and so on. And it really brings so much pain in me with this reality. So I know, like, when I say that I was able to choose a country, I know that that was also like a privilege as well. And because I'm aware of it and I can speak up on this, this is how I feel like this is me being me, and this is the message of I want to be treated the same. And I'm not only pointing out Ukraine and Palestine, it's also important to talk about other countries like Sudan and Congo and so many, and Rohingya as well, and so many other countries, because yeah, it's like I feel like the oppression represents so many nations and so many people around the world. And with the question of how I see myself today, I honestly see myself, and this is something new that I started. Before I used to say I am a storyteller. Today I would say I'm a liberated storyteller, because with storytelling, it holds so much space to liberate ourselves from within. And I think this is exactly what we are doing in Waves to Home, to really, like, through the safe spaces, to explore the stories we tell ourselves and get liberation out of it. Because if today I still see myself as a victim, and I still hold on to the generational trauma and everything, I know that the occupation would win. I know that the occupation and all of this colonialism and so on, it would get into me. But when I say that I liberated myself, then I'm able to really, like, fight for justice and fight for peace and fight for my communities and for the liberation of my own communities. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm only like a peace ambassador and storyteller. I would say today I am a liberated human. No matter where I come from, I am a liberated human. And I think with all of this, like, background and so on, I feel like I belong to the world. So I might say today that home is within me, but I think like home is also the world for me. So yeah, I belong to the world.
Ma'am, thank you so much for that insight. We truly agree that after all the truthful statements that you gave, you are truly a liberated storyteller, and one not only for yourself but for the world through your wider project, The Waves to Home. So, ma'am, as you highlighted, how there is a gap between the dehumanization that we might see with the narratives imposed on third world countries like Palestine, Congo, or even with the Rohingyas in Myanmar, and at the same time a form of privilege or the humanization that people in Ukraine had to enjoy. So ma'am, along those lines, you've also spoken about the idea of selected empathy in your past dialogues. What was that one moment that made you realize that the world reflects differently depending upon which identity you come from?
I think this is very important, also like related to the dehumanization and how the media, it's mostly in the media that I felt like, wow, it's like the whole world welcomed my Ukrainian side. And now with the Palestinian, with Gaza genocide and so on, suddenly the whole mainstream media like didn't say it's a genocide and is just saying it's a like a conflict, and not even saying like, yeah, it's a genocide. It's saying it's a conflict between like Israel and Palestine, when in reality it's so simple. There's no conflict between occupiers and occupied people, and between oppressors and oppressed. So what conflict are we talking about? So I think the selective empathy that I felt, I would say, and maybe not today, because I feel like I'm very like I have a community of people who see both sides of me as Zoya, as a human, and without dehumanizing me. But before, when the genocide in Gaza started, I could see it clearly with how I introduce myself. If I were to introduce myself as Ukrainian first, I could see the empathy in people's eyes. And then if I were to introduce myself as a Palestinian first, I needed first to prove to people like, hey, I'm not a terrorist. I'm as peaceful as you are, and I'm not here to do any violence or anything. So I needed first to prove to the people I'm talking to that I'm a human, and then the conversation could start. And this shows a lot about like the narratives that people are holding about us, and the dehumanizing narrative that like automatically Palestinians are barbarians, are like dehumanized in a way. And this is from the way the politicians would openly talk and state about Palestinians. And this is exactly how the genocide was justified. And if we go back in history, it's the same exact tactic to how the Nazis were able to justify the Holocaust against the Jewish people and other people as well. So it's the same narrative, it's the same propaganda that they use. And by the way, like this is something I do talk about as well, which me, like after escaping Ukraine, I went to Auschwitz, the Holocaust camp, and I needed to be there. I don't know why, but I felt the need to go there and see like the pain and understand, better understand the pain and the structure and how things happened. And I remember reading there like for us not to something along the lines that in order for us not to repeat the history, we need to remember it, something like that. And like back then, the genocide in Gaza like was still not, it didn't begin. And I remember standing there and I knew that, wow, one day the world will also create memorials for Gaza, and we will question like how did the world allow that to happen for children, and how did the world justified all of this killing, and then the genocide started later on. So it makes me think of these cycles of violence and how like the cycle hasn't stopped and it's still ongoing. So and this is allowed with this dehumanization, with this selective empathy, and it's obviously clearly with like my Ukrainian side being referred as to a hero in front of the world, and my Palestinian side being referred as a terrorist. And when I tell the world like, hey, I don't want to be your hero nor your terrorist, I'm just a human, and this is how I want to be referred to be seen as a human. And it is honestly sad that we're living in the 21st century and we're still trying to prove to the world that we are humans and we exist to live. And that's it. Like, we just want to live. And when I speak to my friends in Gaza, it's mostly they tell me, Zoya, like, we don't hate, like, I don't carry hate, they would tell me. It's just they tell me I hate the injustices. I just want this to end and I just want to live. So it's they are carrying more love for life than hate for the injustices. They have the love to live, and this is what they want. And this is their right. Every human has the right to live. So, yeah.
Ma'am, that's such a wonderful insight, so impactful. If we totally ponder about it, it's such a paradox about how narratives that are put forward by storytellers and at the same time narratives that are put forward by media houses can, shift the reality so much. Ultimately, we all are humans, and no one has the right to impose, baseless titles surrounding us. As you mentioned that in Ukraine you are celebrated as maybe a hero, and in Gaza you might be viewed as a terrorist. That is something which is totally baseless, as ultimately we all are humans with the same flesh and blood. So, even so, that brings me to my next question. There is this one statement that we hear globally: refugees are not victims, but they are survivors of apathy. So, ma'am, how should we impart this narrative for the wider audience globally, considering that even now people might view someone as victim, but at the same time view some other person in the same plight as maybe a hero or even a survivor. So, how do you connect the dots and empower this narrative globally?
Yes, thank you so much for this question. I think this is exactly what I've been trying to do, like with doing storytelling, to tell people like about the narrative that I choose to tell them and not about the narrative that the media is telling about me. I always say like it's important to say that yes, refugees are victims of wars and genocides and conflicts and so on, but we choose to be not victims of life. And this is exactly the choice because it's also important to see us as victims of wars because that's how like the whole like treatment then changes, but at the same time like we're not victims in life, and I'm not a victim in life, and I choose not to be a victim in life. And I think this is exactly where I see this role or responsibility coming from both sides, whether from the media, the international community, how they want to view the refugee. And this is the role that they need to work on themselves and change the narrative that they tell themselves about the refugees. And when we talk about, for example, empower the refugees to speak up and so on, it's not enough for the media to talk about the refugees, but rather to talk with them. Because we always say that the best storyteller is the person who has lived the experiences and not the person telling about those experiences. So if you really want to understand more about refugees, invite them. Let them tell their own stories. So that is the role that the media needs to play. And then I say the role of the refugee then. And this is the role that every refugee has like the chance to play in their own story, in how they choose to see their own stories. And this is where we need also like the safe spaces. This is where we need the sense of community in order to be able to explore those narratives and be able to change the narratives that are limiting us or holding us back. And this is exactly the role of storytelling. And for example, I mentioned that I am like a liberated storyteller today because of the safety. And of course, like we cannot talk about this, just to make sure that we're on the same page. Like I cannot talk about, like, for example, people who are living a genocide, like they need to then create a space for themselves and see themselves as warriors and as fighters. We cannot talk about that because the safety, the safe space, they don't have it. So it doesn't apply to them. They are in a survival mode. Now I'm talking more about the refugees who are already in safe spaces, in new countries, in a space where they can explore themselves. They are receiving the support. And this is my situation, and I can talk about myself in this. And in my situation, like with the safe spaces that I received, I was then able to explore this narrative and become this liberated storyteller. And then with Waves to Home, we are trying to then create these safe spaces for others, to then they can explore their own narratives and also explore how they can liberate themselves from narratives that are holding them back, or colonial narratives. And in a way it becomes decolonization because they are able to reclaim the narrative that they want to tell, not that the world tells them about them. And also what we do, for example, in Waves to Home, we start with the individual and then we go to collective storytelling. And with collective storytelling, we then bridge the stories because we need each other. I cannot sit on my own and try to change the story because my story is linked to other stories. We're so connected, more than we think we are. And then we try to bridge these stories. And in a way, this is where the step of storytelling and peace building play together. Because when we are able to bridge the stories, we no longer become us and them. We become as one. We become a community. And then we try to use then these stories as impact storytelling to bring our own stories and then use them for better like social change. And this is what exactly I'm doing, for example, today. So this is how the process of storytelling can really bring in change to the world, but it somehow needs to start with us, and it needs to start in communities as well.
Ma'am, that's so beautifully put, and that gives us a lot to think about actually. So, as you just mentioned, we should respect that a person is being victimized, but at the same time, acknowledge the fact that he or she is trying to mold those circumstances into choices. So, ma'am, we truly agree with that fact, and how you highlighted about your Waves to Home project. It's aimed to create a safe space for individuals to voice their stories out and not just be limited down by the perspectives that have been laid down by media. That is something which is so powerful, and it allows us to present our perspective or our angle of the story in a way that people will relate to it in a much more better way. And to take the conversation forward, I would like to hand it over to Safia so that she can continue this discourse in the best way possible. So,
Thank you so
Safia,
much.
the floor is yours. Thanks a lot, ma'am.
Thank thank you so much, Ojas. And Zoya ma'am, it has been truly a pleasure to listen you for the course of the past half an hour. I mean, such impactful words coming from you, which are depicting sheer strength and resilience, despite the fact that you carry a sense of generational trauma within you, as you mentioned. But it is so inspiring to see that how you did not decide to mar your personality with that generational trauma, but instead become a beacon of humanity in this grave world that stands today in front of us, that is just filled with hatred and all such negative connotations. Now coming to and shifting the focus towards your project Waves to Home, about which you have already mentioned. So we by now have understood that Waves to Home as a project not just aims to give a platform to the refugees and the displaced people to share their stories, but rather also gives them a safe space and heaven that kind of enables them to see themselves in a positive light as warriors or fighters, rather than seeing them in negative connotations like being hapless people or being victims. And you already also mentioned how you are able to connect with refugees from different parts of the world through this project, be it the Rohingyas of Myanmar or people from Sudan or Ukraine or Palestine. So, ma'am, my question to you is that what are those similarities that you see in the emotional or the tangible journeys of these people who come from different parts of the world, but are kind of connected by that sense of being a refugee and being enveloped by that stigma that surrounds them?
Safia, thank you so much for this question. And it's really like an mind opening for me, eye opening, because I was never asked this question, like to connect. It's a beautiful, beautiful question. Yeah, like I always like we worked with refugees with from different communities, and we usually connect the dots on many like more on the struggles, but like I never sat and really reflected on the dots being connected on like a human level between the people. And I think something like that I can share from my own personal experience, something that I experienced with other refugees, is this sense of carrying so much pain. Like we do carry so much pain, we have so many struggles, and we acknowledge the pain, we acknowledge the trauma, but there's something that makes it special about these people who leave their homes and are also questioning what home means to them and are trying to build this sense of home with the people or in the new countries and so on. And I would say it's this love for life and the spirit that no one can take away from them. And you would really like, if you talk with refugees, you would mostly find them so much full of life. And people, for example, often ask me like, Zoya, how come you can be this full of life with everything that you've lived and you experienced and so on? How can you be this full of life? And I tell them, like, because we experience so many difficulties and because we know how it feels to lose your home and lose so many things, then you become more appreciative, then you become more like carrying so much gratitude in you, and you become like more grateful for the beautiful things that are happening in your life, and then you start noticing them, so you become more alive to notice these things. And even, for example, and I say like it's people who are still going through these difficulties that teach us life. For example, in Gaza, when you see, I have a friend, his name Ahmad, and he's such a beautiful soul, and he lost over 60 of his close friends, and it's like unimaginable to even talk with someone who has lost this many close friends. And he tells me like he keeps on sending me pictures of sunsets and sunrises and the water, and he tells me that it's true that the occupation killed all of like the people that I love and so on, and my home, I lost my home and so on. But then he tells me like one thing they cannot take away from us is the sea. They cannot kill the stars, they cannot kill the moon and the sun and so on. And he holds on to that. So it's in these small details. Or for example, in Ukraine, I also see my family being together and like trying to stay as much alive as they can be with all of the difficulties that they face. And also in other countries, you see that people are trying to reconnect with their inner child, or because so many had to grow faster, and now in the moment when they go to safety, they try to reconnect to what's alive in them. So I would really say that it's the, yeah, it's the Yeah, I would say it's on a personal level, it's the spirit that no one can take away from us, being this full of life. And on a collective level, I would say it's the community. And it's something that I've been learning, and it's something that I've been trying to build as well, which is this sense of community in which people need each other. And I think this is how we survive. With all of this amount of trauma, it's in communities that we thrive and we survive and we're able to process things when we share and when we do storytelling, when I share to a friend and a friend shares with me. It's through this sense of community. So I would say on a personal level, it's the spirit, and on a collective level, it's when you see refugees coming together and still being full of life together, I would say.
Well, ma'am, I think you have very beautifully encapsulated as to how the people who are displaced or rather refugees and have been through such grave conditions in life, they are more full of life than the people who are living a peaceful and normal life. But, ma'am, I would like to point out here that, despite the fact that they are more cheerful or maybe more spirited and full of life, as you had already earlier pointed out, that when you were a little kid and you used to stay in a refugee camp, you were somewhere always in that anxiety that while other people and children, they were worried about their marks or other things, you were worried that your friend might ask you that, okay, I want to come to your home for a sleepover. So ma'am, I would like to connect it to the fact that no matter how much light you have inside yourself, if the conditions around you are not conducive, then somewhere or the other you are made to feel negative about something. So there is a kind of stigma that still exists pertaining to the refugee people or the migrant people who are displaced from their homes. And we would all agree that it is the youth who are the leaders of tomorrow. I mean, all of us who are currently on this panel, we all are a part of youth. And me, Ojas, and Arnav being the Gen Zs. And we know that in today's time, we are living in a world that is ruled by the Gen Zs, which was very evident from the recent happenings in Nepal, where there was an entire protest led by the Gen Zs in order to topple down the government. And Gen Zs, ma'am, as you might also know, is a generation that, claims to be very much aware about everything. And they also claim to be emotionally very, upfront and have a very good emotional quotient, because they assert that they have brought mental picture into the limelight, and they have brought other such emotional yet sensitive issues into the forefront, which were kind of not discussed and addressed to openly in the foregoing generations, because they were rather brushed under the carpet. So I would like to ask you that in your opinion, what role do you think that the youth and the young people can play in establishing a more conducive, healthy, and safe environment for the refugees around the world?
Thank you so much. I think, wow, that's why I love talking with Gen Zs, honestly. And I think, I honestly think that we're not the leaders of tomorrow. I guess like we're the leaders of today, and it's already happening. Like the shifts are happening around the world. And I think we need to believe that, hey, the change is already happening. And I really see us as the leaders of today. So I think something that really gives me so much hope. And before I talk about the hope, I really want to talk about something that you highlighted, and which is very important to be highlighted, like about the negative conditions. Because sometimes, like as a child, I was also very alive, and I was very alive, but that was like false positivity. And because it was a trauma response, so someone could be so much full of life, but it doesn't mean that what they have within is so healthy. And the trauma is ongoing, and when the trauma is ongoing, we cannot talk about like finding peace and finding healing. And this is something like I really want to point out on, like today as Wavestone, we work on the intersection between storytelling, peace, and justice, and trauma and healing. And why do we say like peace and justice? Because we cannot talk about like the power of storytelling. It has a power in building peace building, but for it to be lasting peace and for the people to find true healing, there needs to be a sense of justice. Because when the sense of justice is not there, we cannot talk about healing. So today, I cannot really say that I'm fully healed when my countries are not free. Because like I cannot be free when they are not free, and it's very much connected. So I think we can be full of life, but it doesn't mean that if we someone as full of life, that means, oh, that's okay, they don't need help, they're on their own, they are healed and so on. No, it's not like that, because if there is no true justice, we cannot talk about healing. And this is the sense of that we are becoming more aware of. There's no true healing without justice. I cannot be fully alive and genuinely, truly alive without the sense of justice. So, true healing comes with justice, and true peace comes with justice as well. So, for us to really fight for a peaceful world, we need to fight for justice. Um, and going back to hope, and I think like what really gives me so much hope is seeing how the youth, like, hey, the propaganda that worked for so many decades, and what is propaganda? It's a narrative, it's storytelling as well. And it worked so well, like for the past few decades, whether it works perfectly well with the ongoing Nakba that we call like the genocide in Gaza and Palestine, with the ethnic cleansing, or in Ukraine. It also did not start in 2022. The narrative has been there since 2014 and even before. So it did not start today. And like, to fight the propaganda, to fight this narrative, we need to fight it with another story. And that is the story that we are creating today. So I really believe that, like with this hope and with the new generation and the youth and so on, the hope lies in how we are able to connect the dots. So, for example, today you're in India and I'm in Switzerland, and being Palestinian Ukrainian, one could think of like, how is it connected? Like, why would you speak with someone from the other part of the world? But because it's very connected, we need to be talking about these topics, because we are all connected and it's all linked. Because, like, when they say no one is free until everyone is free, that is true. I cannot be free if the people in Sudan are not free, or the people in Congo, or the people in other oppressed nation, because the true problem and the root causes of these problems comes with white supremacy, colonialism, capitalism, occupation. And if we allow it in one part of the world, then it will come eventually to the other part of the world. And that is how it's very connected. So what really gives me so much hope with the youth is how, like, we are not believing one narrative that is coming to us. We are questioning, we're being critical, and we're connecting the dots. And connecting the dots not only with, for example, the social human rights aspect, but rather also with the environment and with other forms of justice and so on. So if someone now today we see, for example, fighting for climate justice, we also see them vocal and fighting for human rights and social justice, because it's all connected and it all goes back to the same root causes. And today, us being here and talking about like the power of the youth and so on, it all goes back to how, as youth, we're trying to make the world a better place. And by doing so, we're connecting the dots. And it's the dots that we need to be speaking about.
We truly agree that Gen Z is not the leader of tomorrow, but rather the leader of today, as you very rightly pointed out. And then, ma'am, when you talked about the thing as to how, when we see a person and if we see him or her to be full of life and fully spirited, we think that, okay, that person is completely okay. But we rather need to delve deeper and go beyond the surface level to see whether that person is actually okay or not. This reminds me of how, you cannot judge a book by its cover. Somebody might be very full of life outside, but you do not know what's happening inside. And as their peer, or somebody who's their friend, it becomes your responsibility to connect the dots and go deeper and help that person come out of that trauma. I think, ma'am, you have very rightly pointed out that it is that criticality and it is that, ability to fight the propaganda that exists in the Gen Zs that is being able to reform the world for the better today. So, ma'am, my next question relates to your personal experience. As you already mentioned that, in your formative years, you had to spend like 15 years of your life in a refugee camp, where, there was always a sense of insecurity and anxiety because, there were bombing, shellings, and you never knew what would happen tomorrow or what would happen the next second. And ma'am, we see that even today, there are millions of children in Gaza or Ukraine or other parts of the world who are compelled to stay in those refugee camps. And we all would agree that how harmful it is for their overall development, be it emotional, physical, or cognitive. But yet they are compelled to stay and grow there because of the global community's failure to address those issues. So, ma'am, I would want to ask you that, what are your hopes for the next generation of children who are currently growing up in such brutal, cruel, and conflict-prone zones?
I think it's a sad reality when it comes to children, and it makes me also think of the Ukrainian children there are being also kidnapped and taken like to Russia, and in a way like they are being played with the Russian propaganda, for example, and then they for one day that they fight against their own people. It's such a sad reality, and we talk about storytelling for people to reconnect with their own story, but what if the story that is being imposed in us is a story that is contradicting, is a story that is hateful, and so on? So it really makes me feel concerned, because the reality today, or in Gaza, like over 20,000 children were killed and over 20,000 are orphans. So it's such a sad reality. And I remember when I was younger, I used to always think about like such a beautiful quote that says something like, it's easier to build it's easier to build happy and strong children than to repair broken man. And it's such a very like it's very deep, because this is what we are doing today. Like the children are being traumatized. And for example, in Gaza, we also don't say that there's PTSD. There's no post in the trauma. It's ongoing. How can we talk about healing when the trauma is ongoing? So honestly, I don't know. I don't know what will happen next. I know that they need safe spaces, but this is something that we're not able to provide in such areas. So I don't know what will happen. I really want to have a message of hope and say that they will grow into happy and, like warriors and so on. But this is not the reality today. And I don't want to be giving any false hope. And I wish, I can just wish and I can pray and say that these children will one day be free from the inside, because they deserve freedom from the inside. And just like we deserve it from the inside, they deserve it as well. And they deserve to be living in a loving and safe family with parents as well, and not losing any of their parents. So, yeah, it's important to recognize the harsh reality they're living in. It's just my wish that we are able to live in a world in which we are able to give safety and joy, and in a time when children need to be. And that's why like you see adults reconnecting with their inner child, because we missed a huge part of our childhood, and now we're trying to reconnect with that part in us. But what about the children today who are living in such harsh realities? It's a sad reality, and I wish I can be more hopeful about it, but it is a sad reality. And I can only wish that they one day can really, instead of hiding from the bombs, they can be running out and laughing crazily, happily, joyfully, freely. This is my wish to the world.
Ma'am, you have aptly talked about the sad reality that exists today, especially in context of the children who are compelled to live in such conflict-prone zones, because of which they kind of also get to experience a lost childhood, where, as you mentioned, that they are not able to freely run or, freely do all the things that normal children do. Instead, they are, looking out for bombs, or maybe doing things that they do not deserve to do. But, ma'am, I would really like to point out that people like you are the only ones who are the beacon of hope for such children who are living in such grave and bad conditions in today's time. And it is organizations like yours that are, a turning point for change for such people, be it adults or children. It is organizations like yours who are actually giving a platform to such people to come up and, reform their lives for the better. So that's really appreciative of you, ma'am. And then now moving towards the final leg of our podcast, my last question to you would be that if you could send one message to someone who is currently experiencing displacement, or maybe living in a conflict prone zone completely without any kind of hope for the future, what could it be?
Well, this is it needs time for reflection. But I think, yeah, maybe from everything that I've been thinking about in the past 2 years, and I think maybe this is a message that I've been telling my friend in Gaza, Ahmad, like when the genocide was like it's still ongoing and so on. I was always telling him that like if you survived yesterday and today, you will survive tomorrow. And I think like I'm very grateful he is alive today. And I think, and these are not my words, these are words that I read in a book called The Choice by Edith Edgar, who is a Holocaust survivor. And I was really inspired by her words. And I think like I couldn't offer safety to my friend in Gaza, but at least I could offer him some hope. And actually like I was trying to give him hope, but it was him giving me hope. So I think we always talk about what we can give them, but honestly, in reality, it's them giving us so much power, so much hope, so much love. And I think like and I think this is how like our healing is interconnected. And I always say that it's not me versus you, it's us together against the injustices. Whoever that other is, it's us together. It should be us together against the injustices, the occupation, the colonialism. This is how it should be. But yeah, I think my message would be to hold on to whatever life is still in them, even though life around them could feel like it's like collapsing. And this is the reality. It is the reality. The life around them could be collapsing, but to hold on to the inner freedom that they have, and they really are free from the inside. And they could be their external freedom could be taken away from them, but I wish that they can hold on to the inner freedom. And because no one can take it away from us, not from me, not from the people in Gaza, not from the people in Ukraine, and not from the people in any oppressed spaces, not from them, because everything could be taken from us externally, but not what we carry within. And I think this is something I'm holding on to with myself, and I really hope others can hold as well, because it's the only hope, the last resort of hope that we can get, which is this inner freedom and the spirit of keeping ourselves alive from the inside. So for when the day comes and they're able to be in safety and in peace and hopefully in a world with justice, that's when they can really feel that they are free from the inside, but also from the outside.
That is so beautiful, ma'am. You have so beautifully articulated it, because I think we all would agree that it is hope and humanity that keeps us alive, no matter the situation. So, Zoya, ma'am, thank you so much for sharing your story and your truth with us. The clarity and courage in your words remind us that storytelling is not just a narrative, but rather it is resistance, rebuilding, and remembrance. I'm sure that you have inspired millions of people, and you will continue to do so through this podcast as well. To everyone watching, if today's conversation moved you, stay connected with Niti, the Policy Lab, for more powerful dialogues like this, because there is so much more to learn, listen to, and unlearn. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure as well. And I learned so much from you. So thank you so much.